Господа. We begin our working session number 9 on the issue of democratic institutions, where we will be covering issues, important issues I might add, of democratic elections, of democracy at the national, regional and local levels, democratic lawmaking, and citizenship and political rights. The details of this session are included in your annotated agenda, as well as specific questions which we hope to include in the discussion and that we trust that speakers will be looking at when making their statements. It is also my pleasure to introduce two eminent speakers for our panel. The first is Ms. Vilija Abramekienė from Lithuania. She is a parliamentary deputy and has been elected to the Seimas for the 5th term in 2012. She is an active member of the Committee on European Affairs and of the Committee on Legal Affairs of that Seimas, as well as the Vice President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and a leader of the women's branch of the Homeland Union, Lithuanian Christian Democrats. Ms. Abramekienė used to be a member of the Lithuanian Reform Movement, Saudias, from 1988 onwards, and worked as a lecturer musicologist for the Academy of Music and Theatre in Lithuania until 1992. And her professional way was then followed by law studies in Vilnius and her position in the parliament. So without further ado, I pass the floor to her for her presentation, and then we'll move to the next speaker, Mr. Pietro Ducci, who I will also introduce at that point. Thank you very much. I look forward to an interesting session, and I pass the floor to Ms. Abramekienė.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Dzień dobry do wszystkich.
Good afternoon to all of you who understand Polish.
I should switch to English, which is not so easy for me. But of course, I understand that some of you can be a little bit surprised because it's unusual to see representative of the Parliamentary Assembly in the introductions role here in ODIHR. I'm not a scientist comparativist, as you already know, what would be quite valuable in this case. But my experience comes from my life, from my personal experience in strengthening democracy in my own country, as well as international experience, especially in election observation. The OSCE is unique, having one of the most clear set of electoral commitments agreed by a regional organization in the world. The 1990 Copenhagen document has served the countries for many years. It has provided clear practical guidance for OSCE election observers as a sort of checklist of requirements for democratic elections. But the Copenhagen document is much more than the set of technical rules only. It's all about the essence and about the spirit of democracy. Its guidelines, if fulfilled, of course, serve as some sort of remedy for achieving and maintaining a healthy democratic rule. As a long-standing Lithuanian parliamentarian myself, I can share with you an example how principles enshrined in the Copenhagen document have helped my country to consolidate its parliamentary democracy. I became a parliamentarian in 1992 when my party lost the general elections. And I remember very well how Andrius Kubilius, our former prime minister, but a very young politician at this time, started to write the new statute of the Seimas, National Parliament of Lithuania. The statute which had to institutionalize the parliamentary opposition. The ruling majority at that time consisted of former communists who were not so interested to pass a new statute. But in 1996, when we won the general elections again, it was our first priority to do, to adopt a new statute of the Seimas, and we provided the clearly defined rights to our political opponents with a clear purpose: to accomplish the multi-party system and political pluralism in action, in reality. And I can say that this action, fair implementation of principles enshrined both in Lithuanian constitution and OEC documents, has had a detrimental impact for the development of parliamentary democracy in Lithuania. This is why, during my visits to other states, especially OECE countries, I am always trying to understand if there is or not a genuine political opposition in this concrete country, and what are the rights of this political opposition, because it is a precondition for both free and fair democratic elections and democratic institutions. Despite the fact that in the OECE summit in Astana, all participating states clearly stated that OECE commitments should be implemented in its entirety, we continue to see setbacks. Some countries simply are not meeting their commitments to holding genuine elections. But one trend in some of the most egregious offenders can be identified: the shutting down of opposition voices far in advance of elections, through harassment, intimidation, various administrative measures, and imprisonment, and not only imprisonments, we saw even killing. I have in my mind my friend of my party, Boris Nemtsov. And we have often seen critics of government effectively silenced before they can mount any challenge in an election. Let's call it openly. Criticism from election observers every 4 or 5 years simply is not sufficient. Governments should be accountable in implementing OECE election recommendations without any exceptions. All talks about cultural, religious, democratic differences are just mere attempts to get carte blanche on the gross violation of the OECE commitments. Observing today's realities, we can draw clear conclusion that ignorance of OECE commitments by the states is a warning signal to all of us, because internal oppression of own people, finally leads to external aggression. Another worrying trend is the misuse of self-determination principle and subsequently elections for justification of the annexation policy. Last year, we saw a gross violation of Helsinki Final Act, which was caused by Russian annexation of Crimea. This year, we see clear attempt by Russia to repeat this model in separatists-controlled eastern Ukraine, where fake elections are planned, in gross violation of Minsk agreements and Ukrainian constitution. OECE should adequately react to these actions. Of course, within the OECE, both ODIHR and the Parliamentary Assembly play crucial roles, especially in observing elections. ODIHR's expertise in long-term observation and in the technicalities of elections is well known. We have, as you all know, a cooperation agreement that brings the OECE Parliamentary Assembly and the ODIHR together, in which the expertise of ODIHR is vetted with the political judgment and responsibility of senior politicians. This joining of expertise gives the OECE unmatched credibility in the field of election observation. A recent decision of the Parliamentary Assembly to support ODIHR regarding the election observation in Azerbaijan shows that the Parliamentary Assembly is strongly committed to the Copenhagen document. We are a strong ally for governments looking to implement their commitments, and we encourage continued active discussion and engagement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Abrimekene. And the next speaker that we have introducing our session is Mr. Pietro Ducci, who is the acting director of the Directorate for Democracy Support, in addition to his tasks as the head of the Democracy and Elections Action Unit. Mr. Ducci entered the European institutions in 1991. From September 2001, he served in the European Parliament in the Directorate General for Internal Policies as the head of the Legislative Coordination Service. Since 2007, Mr. Ducci has headed the Election Observation Unit in the European Parliament Directorate General for External Policies, which in 2014 became Democracy and Elections Action Unit. This unit is in charge of developing and structuring European Parliament election observation activity, organizing European Parliament election observation delegations, and developing interinstitutional and international relations in this field. And I very much appreciate the cooperation that we've had with his institution, as with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, where I think the working relationship between all of our institutions has been very good. I pass now the floor to Mr. Ducci for his introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Beata. Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank the ODIHR for giving me the possibility to be here around the table today with you. It's an honor for a civil servant of a European Union institution, and in particular from the European Parliament, as so often we have been working on the field with the ODIHR, with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and to have a chance to discuss in such an important forum is definitely something that the European Parliament appreciates. As the moderator has said, and I will spare you a presentation of myself, I am, therefore, I'm a civil servant, I'm Italian, and I'm working for the European Parliament since a long time. And I would like to focus on my presentation on how, on one side, the European Parliament tackles election observation, and on the other side, if you allow, seeing the subject of the session, a little bit how, in general, democracy support activities are carried out by the institution for which I work. Therefore, in the field of election observation, knowing that on my side, on the administrative side, we are the ones who are responsible to organize and to help parliamentarians of the institution carrying out these activities. At the political level, the European Parliament has since a long time set up a specific group, which is called the Democracy Support and Election Coordination Group, who is the main body of the House, who's responsible for every democracy support activities. Without going into all the details of what this body is doing, for the session this afternoon, I will focus on election observation on one side and on capacity building a little bit on the other, as another pillar of the activities. First of all, this body, which is a slightly little body comparing to other parliamentary body of the institution. It is composed by 15 members, but it is composed of very high-level and prominent members. It is co-chaired by the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the chair of the Development Committee. The vice president responsible for democracy is also a member of this body, so as the chair of the Subcommittee on Human Rights. Therefore, all the actors active in the field of external relations do take part in the deliberation of this body. With regard to election observation, the body has got three main responsibilities: to plan election observation activities, to carry out the methodology on how members of parliament should observe election, and to maintain and increase and develop relation with the international community. With regard to planification, the body is responsible, first of all, within the EU system to discuss with the High Representative Vice President of the Commission, Ms. Mogherini, to discuss EU election observation missions, choice of chief observers, and choice of countries where to observe. but also to discuss and to decide among its members where to observe elections. This is one of the main tasks of this body, who is therefore every 6 months, because the calendar of election is rather volatile, as you might know very well. So every 6 months, the body decides on where Parliament should send delegation for the forthcoming 6 months. The second pillar of activities in the field of election observation is to develop the methodology. And the methodology is something on which this body has been investing a lot, because from at least 15 years, there has been a growing development on how parliamentarians should be involved in observing election and how they should carry out this job. And slowly but constantly, improvement have been brought to this methodology. I can, for example, quote the fact that recently there has been a decision that members of parliament observing election should adhere not only to international standards and to the standards and observe according to the standards of the House of the countries where we are observing, but also to a specific code of conduct where the various conditions how to observe are clearly stated, and every member adheres to that. With regard to international relation and cooperation with the other institutions, the fact that I am here today already can give you an example of how much Parliament values the cooperation with the ODIHR, who is one of the most important body with whom it is possible for the European Parliament to carry out election observation, but also as the ODIHR, the European Parliament has adhered to the Declaration of Principle for International Observation, which is a reference document for all the institutions who are actively trying to observe election in various parts of the world. And I'm particularly pleased to notice that recently the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly has also decided to adhere to this document, which reinforces the capacity of parliamentarians to be actors of election observation. Apart from that, of course, all other international organizations active in the field are also partners of the European Parliament, and we always try to work in close cooperation with the others, because there is nothing more wrong than to pretend observing election just on our side, one institution, another institution on the other side. The more the persons are cooperating, the more exchanges there are, the better it is, although sometimes there are difficulties to overcome, like it has been the case in some situations in the field. If I can go now to exactly how election observation our delegation work, there is an important statement that I would like to do from the very beginning. Members of Parliament observing elections are, by definition, short-term observers. They cannot spend that much time into a country because their political agenda are extremely busy, and therefore all the methodology that has been developed has been developed based on the possibility for the European Parliament to be integrated into long-term professional credible missions. In the sense, that means that when we decide whether to send a mission or not, the first, or maybe the second, the first criteria is to be invited by the country, and that's important. But the second one is that there is the presence of a long-term mission in the country which would allow parliamentarians to fulfill their job. By definition for us, the long-term credible and professional mission are the ones organized by the ODIHR, with whom we have always enjoyed a strong cooperation since a long time. And every time that the European Parliament is invited by an OSCE country to observe its elections, we turn to the ODIHR and we establish an excellent cooperation and try to work together. And of course, as parliamentarians, members of the European Parliament work in excellent cooperation also with members of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and if present, also with the members of the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly. Altogether, this institution try to assess the election in the most professional way and in the most credible way. And the presence of parliamentarians of the European Parliament, as seen from the objective of our institution, is to try to reinforce politically a very factual and pragmatical observation and careful and professional observation with a little bit of a political flavor brought by our parliamentarians. This has been the case in the past. As I said, there has been some time where there has been some difficulties, because it's always difficult to put a lot of people around the table and to come with a final comprehensive statement. But this is something which has proved to be effective, and the European Parliament will invest a lot in the future in continuing this close cooperation. If I can now turn quickly to the second part, which is the activities more wide than just election observation, let's say the capacity building activities developed with parliament of third countries. I would like to say that since at least the beginning of this legislature, which started in July 2014, the European Parliament has taken a position which is something which is has been discussed by many professional actors in this field, that it is very important to observe election, but Parliament has decided that to organize its activities around the cycle, around an election cycle, and not focus only on election day or the election months, but to try to have an input and try to work together with the concerned countries where elections are taking place before the election and in particular after the election. Basically, what the European Parliament is trying to do is trying to develop concretely some activities of follow-up. And in particular, these activities, which are called comprehensive democracy support activities, which are the responsibility of the political body I told you before, entail that once a country is considered as a possible priority from whom to work in the field of democracy support, there are very good contacts which are established with the natural parliament of the European Parliament, which is the parliament of the country, and there are a lot of programs of capacity building which are developed, of course, always on demand of the country, as it is the same when you are invited for election observation. We are invited to develop capacity building activities, and we've got excellent examples of what we're trying to do in the future, because this is an activity which has started very recently. And for example, with Ukraine, there has been the signature of a memorandum of understanding between Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, and Mr. Groisman, the Chair of the Rada, in order to see together what we could do in order to help the Rada developing its activities in its parliament. This is an example. There will be many other in the future, and I will end my introduction by saying that also there, as we establish excellent cooperation with the international community, the ODIHR, and all the other institutions, also in this field, we value the cooperation with the others, because once again, if we are able to observe elections together, we should be able to assist a country and to help a country at its demand on developing democratic institutions with the others. We did with the ODIHR a little bit of work in the past, and based on that example some years ago, we would like to continue, and therefore from the side of the European Parliament, there is a strong political will to continue working with all the international actors and the parliaments of the given country in order to develop as much as possible democratic institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ducci, and thank you to both of our introducers for their very thought-provocative words and for setting the tone of the discussion, which I hope will be an interactive one and also a very involved one. To remind participants, the session is, of course, about democratic elections, and that's one important component, but it also will be dealing with other elements of democracy and democratic lawmaking. Just to remind some of the questions that we seek to address in this session, they include how OSCE participating states are meeting their commitments with regard to conducting democratic elections, some examples of evolving good practice concerning various regulation, especially in the area of campaign finance, particular challenges that participating states encounter in meeting their commitments regarding the media in an election campaign, challenges to ensuring full compliance with OSCE commitments concerning citizen and international election observation, and what can be done to further enhance the follow-up by participating states to ODIHR's recommendations. We would also like to hear how democracy can be strengthened at national, regional, and local levels, how legislation and regulation on political parties can enhance political pluralism and participation, how legislation, regulation, codes of conduct may contribute to increased transparency and accountability of parliaments, how participating states can foster and strengthen youth participation in public affairs, and also to what extent think tanks and civil society support democratic processes and lend voice to underrepresented constituencies. As well, there are important questions about how legislative processes in the OSCE participating states can can indeed make transparent and be made in transparent and open as required by OSCE commitments. Some examples of good practice in the area of democratic lawmaking, including particular examples of proper legislative planning, impact assessment, and consultation processes. What can be done to ensure that laws are implemented properly once they are adopted? How lawmakers can ensure that all those that are interested in and relevant for a process of preparing individual laws are identified and consulted in an open and meaningful way, as well as what the relationship is between citizenship of an individual and the extent and/or criteria for his or her enjoyment of specific political rights. What information policies and outreach strategies have been used by participating states to make resident citizens aware of their political rights to engage them in public life? And what are some examples of good practices for the participation of resident non-citizens in political life and how they can be practically affected and implemented in other OSCE participating states? So those are some of the issues that we hope to address. We currently have 32 speakers on the speaker list, which is still open behind me. We have 3.5 minutes for each speaker to make their statement. And just a few comments on that. We kindly request that the comments be directly related to what has been said before. We strongly encourage speakers not to read pre-prepared statements, and we remind that these can be submitted to the documentation desk for distribution through the documentation distribution system to all participants. That participants are requested to circulate any recommendations that they may have electronically and in writing in order to ensure an accurate record of this Human Dimension implementation meeting session and also to facilitate follow-up. And this can also be done through the documentation desk. Where possible, written recommendations will be compiled, collated, and circulated electronically. And finally, I would ask that speakers kindly keep their comments short and to the point. Please feel free to ask questions relating to the discussion in your presentation. We, of course, welcome criticism, but we hope that it is also constructive and presented in that way. And finally, to say that there is a right to reply, and that can also be listed in the speakers list, which will be turned to at the end of our discussions. And the last point that I would like to make is that due to the interpreter's strict contractual requirements, the session must finish on time, and unfortunately, if we continue beyond the allocated time, the interpretation will not be available. So I thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to our discussion, and I turn now to the first speaker on our list, which is to the delegation of Spain on behalf of the European Union. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and also thank you very much to the distinguished introducers for the very interesting presentations. The following EU statement is also on behalf of the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Liechtenstein, Norway, Ukraine, San Marino. Madam Moderator, please note that this list of aligned states is not final. The full list will be provided on the written version of this statement. On the other hand, taking into account the time, I'm going to summarize some of the paragraphs of my statement, but the full version will be distributed in writing. Madam Moderator, I'm really honored to intervene on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The European Union is founded on the belief that the participation of the citizens in the conduct of public affairs is a pillar of democratic societies. Genuinely democratic and participatory governance requires a strong, independent, and empowered civil society. We therefore note with deep concern the shrinking of civil society space in the region, together with a worrying trend of criminalization of human rights defenders. Madam Moderator, transparent, credible, and competitive elections are the cornerstone of democracy. For this reason, The EU grants the utmost importance to the elections observation activities conducted by ODIHR. Let me express our full support to ODIHR's mandate in assisting participating states. Let me also express our full acknowledgement of ODIHR's capacity and authority to decide the format of the electoral observation missions. Likewise, we reiterate our unequivocal support to its long-standing and well-established methodology that is the safeguard of an independent, impartial, and professional election observation. This methodology has inspired other organizations, including the EU. The EU attaches paramount importance to providing ODIHR with sufficient financial and human resources for electoral observation missions. The recommendations of ODIHR, their assessments are key for improving the overall electoral framework and for strengthening democratic institutions. Therefore, we think that failure to secure these resources that I mentioned undermines ODIHR's mandate. In this respect, the EU notes with deep concern the increasing difficulties faced by ODIHR to obtain the requested number of seconded observers, as was made apparent in the case inter alia of the recent elections in Albania and Kazakhstan. We deeply regret that Azerbaijan placed restrictions on ODIHR's planned election observation recently. Allow me, Madam Moderator, taking into account I'm talking on behalf of so many participating states, to read very, very quickly the EU recommendations on this issue, very much to the point. Our recommendations to the participating states in relation to these sessions are: first, ensure the right of citizens to political participation in a free and fair climate without undue restrictions. Second, ensure the right to stand for elections without any undue restriction. Third, ensure transparent, pluralistic, and competitive elections that provide the electorate with a genuine choice. Fourth, secure timely financial and human resources needed by ODIHR. Fifth, extend early and unrestricted invitation to ODIHR to observe their election in line with OSCE commitments. Sixth, constructively engage on follow-up activities to election observation reports in cooperation with ODIHR. Seventh, ensure a strong, independent, and empowered civil society. Finally, Madam Moderator, we think that democratic societies cannot be achieved without democratic check and balance. This requires, in particular, strengthening the role and function of the Parliament as a space of open debate. Likewise, equal participation and representation of women and men in all decision-making structures is key for democratic societies. Finally, it is essential that participating states actively promote and protect fundamental freedoms, which are the enablers of the rest of rights and without whose full exercise and enjoyment no genuine democracy is possible. Thank you very much to all of you.
Muchas gracias, and thank you very much for the concrete recommendations, which I think are very useful for the further discussion. The next on our speakers list is the International Association of Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes. Sir, you have the floor.
Madam Moderator, distinguished participants, where are the dictatorship states? Azerbaijan, Belarus, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and the aggressive Russia. We would like to remind you, dictatorships oppress human rights, and dictators can't be changed. They can only be overthrown. Elections in a dictatorship are just a spectacle. They're planned in advance. It's just a demonstration for witnesses from democratic states. I mean, what point is there about talking about recent so-called elections in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, or the local ones in the Russian Federation? The spectacle was held in accordance with the usual scenario where there is no hint of democracy or fairness. But on the 11th of October in Belarus, we will have the final act of the play called voting. The dictator Lukashenko would like to write in, like Nazarbayev, 97.7% of the votes. But, you know, that would not be credible for the West, and so we'll bring it down to 87%. Why? Well, in European political discussions, there already talk about recognizing Alexander Lukashenko a legitimate president. But as usual, European politicians are making a mistake. They consider that by recognizing him and taking away the so-called sanctions, we might tear Lukashenko away from Moscow, from Putin. But it would be difficult to come up with a more stupid opinion. Recently, the dictator Lukashenko once again stated that he won't go westward. But if the dictator Lukashenko were to be given 300 billion euros like Greece, I mean, it's about the same population, with those 300 billion euros, maybe you can keep him away from Moscow for 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years. But if he is simply recognized legitimate without financial assistance, then the legitimate president of Belarus will finally tear Belarus away from the Western democratic world and fuse Belarus with Moscow. In 1918, Germany, England, France did not support the Belarus People's Republic, and Belarus was divided between Poland and Russia. Lukashenko has said on a number of occasions that the sovereignty of Belarus is a stupidity. And now, if Belarus becomes incorporated in the Russian Federation, it will not only be the end of statehood, it will be the end of the nation of Belarus, of the people of Belarus. On the other hand, why is Lukashenko not be allowed to travel, whereas other dictators are received in Europe? Violations of human rights? Well, why not call a criminal, a perpetrator. And here the issue is not just the issue of the person of Lukashenko. It's an issue for the whole people of Belarus to be or not to be. Lukashenko must not be recognized as a legitimate president. Sanctions must not be removed from that dictatorship. And finally, some European politologists are beginning to wake up and publicly to state that we should not take wishes for reality, that Lukashenko will not change, there'll be no reform, there'll be no real partnership with the EU. But then, of course, sanctions should also be imposed on the dictator Aliyev in Azerbaijan. Thank you.
On our speakers list is the delegation of the United States of America. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excuse me. I'd like to begin by underscoring the United States' strong support for ODIHR. This year, ODIHR will have deployed election observation missions at the invitation of a number of OSCE participating states, including for the upcoming parliamentary elections in Kyrgyzstan and the presidential election in Belarus. We urge both of these states to implement the recommendations of previous OSCE election observation missions and to ensure a transparent and open vote count and tabulation. We very much regret that ODIHR was compelled to cancel its election observation mission to Azerbaijan because of the government's insistence on limiting the number of observers. We support ODIHR and its independence, which is the foundation of its gold standard reputation for objective, impartial observation. We commend Ukraine for inviting ODIHR to monitor local elections scheduled for October 25th. We regret that combined Russian separatist forces are depriving areas under separatist control of having special local elections on the same day. Russia should direct the separatists to support, without any conditions, local elections in separatist-controlled areas. Such elections should be conducted under Ukrainian law, in line with OSCE standards, and observed by ODIHR, as agreed to in Minsk. Holding sham elections in separatist-controlled areas on any date would be unacceptable and a violation of the Minsk agreements. In Russia, election monitoring organizations are severely constrained. The offices and homes of members of Golos, an election monitoring organization, were subjected to intimidating searches prior to the recent regional elections. In those elections, authorities limited genuine political pluralism by erecting significant barriers to the registration of political parties and electoral candidates, as well as to observation by independent monitors. We urge Hungary to implement the recommendations of the 2014 OSCE Election Observation Mission to address restrictive campaign regulations, biased media coverage, and campaign activities that blurred the separation between political party and the state. We hope that the next round of elections in Turkey on November 1st are conducted in an environment that affirms freedom of expression and the right of members of all ethnic groups to engage in the political process. In Tajikistan, the ODIHR Election Observation Mission for the March 1st parliamentary elections concluded that the elections, quote, took place in a restricted political space and failed to provide a level playing field for candidates, close quote. As a related matter, the United States remains concerned about the government's August 28th banning of the Islamic Renaissance Party, and we are concerned about the recent detentions of IRPT members, including one member who had planned to participate in this very meeting. Regarding Macedonia, we call upon those currently in power and in opposition to work together to ensure next year's elections will be free and fair. Those measures must also ensure the integrity of the voting rights of members of the Romani minority. The April 26 snap presidential elections in Kazakhstan were efficiently administered, but they were not democratic, due in part to the predominant position of the incumbent, the lack of genuine opposition, and the restricted media environment. Madam Moderator, I'll close by noting once again that the United States thanks ODIHR and the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly for their expert efforts in monitoring elections. It's absolutely vital work. We'll submit our full statement for the record. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And the next on our speakers list is the delegation of Canada. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And the full text of our intervention and our recommendations will be shared in writing. Madam Moderator, all 57 OSCE participating states have committed to build democratic institutions and to hold free, fair, and inclusive elections. We have also mandated ODIHR to support us in the implementation of these commitments, notably through the observation of national elections on the basis of a well-known and respected methodology. Canada is proud to have contributed to numerous ODIHR observation missions, most notably in Ukraine, where hundreds of Canadian observers have, over the years, worked with ODIHR to support the democratic aspirations of the people of Ukraine. We are equally proud to welcome in Canada an OSCE election assessment mission for our upcoming federal election on October 19. We also appreciate the crucial contribution of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly to election observation activities, notably through which Canadian parliamentarians have shared their experience and their strong commitment for democracy. Madam Moderator, while long-standing democracies continue their efforts to protect and improve their democratic institutions, and while many younger democracies in the OSCE region strive to develop and establish institutions that reflect their commitment to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, we must not be blind to the worrisome shrinking of democratic space in other participating states. Worse still, some now actively seek to weaken and question our joint OSCE commitments and institutions. We call on those states to cease their attempts at undermining the very foundations of this organization, therefore putting at risk our broader collective security and depriving their own citizens of their rights. It is not sufficient for citizens to have the right to place a ballot in a box. They must feel safe casting that ballot according to their own free will. Citizens must have the confidence that rule of law and human rights are respected, as well as being able to fully enjoy their rights to freedom of peaceful assembly, association, and expression. Moreover, states need a free and vibrant civil society driven by an empowered citizenry, including the full participation of women in all decision-making processes. These conditions are essential to foster a culture of openness for debate, dissent, and diversity, to enhance popular participation in public life and political processes, and to form critical links between people and their elected governments. Madam Moderator, on September 15th, we celebrated the International Day of Democracy, whose theme this year was Space for Civil Society. Concerned by the erosion of this space, Canada continues to work bilaterally and multilaterally to combat this trend. Since 2009, Canada has chaired the Community of Democracies Working Group on Enabling and Protecting Civil Society, which focuses on countering the adoption of legislation that stifles civil society around the world. Madam Moderator, I will read 2 or 3 recommendations out of the 5 that we have. First, for ODIHR to continue strengthening and updating its election observation activities and methodology to ensure it remains a global leader in this field. Second, for our participating states to consider appropriate measures to support ODIHR financially and to engage in genuine dialogue for strengthening, not weakening, ODIHR's election observation activities. And last, for participating states to recommit to the core values of the OSCE and to reverse actions that undermine democratic institutions and the holding of free, fair, and inclusive elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement and again for the concrete recommendations, which I think are most useful. The next on the list of speakers is the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, and you have the floor, please. If the Norwegian Helsinki Committee is not here...
I'm here.
You are. Very good, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Yesterday, on 24 September, the deputies of the Regional Assembly in Pskov, Western Russia, stripped fellow deputy Lev Schlossberg of the Yabloko party of his mandate as a deputy in the Assembly. This, despite the obvious fact that Schlossberg was not put in this position by the Russian authorities or his fellow deputies, but in fact was elected by the local population and was only halfway through his period. The Norwegian Helsinki Committee considers this decision by the Pskov Regional Assembly as a measure to silence Lev Schlossberg, as an outspoken person and as an independent politician who seemed to annoy the local officials by his autonomous position. By preventing Schlossberg from doing his work as a legally elected representative in the Pskov Regional Assembly, the local authorities have not only violated the rights of the Russian citizens to an elected representative, they have also exceeded their mandate, and more importantly, they have contributed to the further undermining of trust in the electoral system of the Russian Federation. Formally, the reason for this action is that Lev Schlossberg has testified as a witness in court in a case against an organization which was announced a foreign agent. The initiative to strip Schlossberg of his seat came from Pskov's political leadership, headed by Governor Andrei Turchak, whose name might be known from the media in connection with the accusation of ordering an assault on journalist Oleg Kashin. Lev Schlossberg is the head of the Yabloko party in Pskov and a vocal figure in the community. He is also the editor of the Pskovskaya Gubernia, a newspaper that received the Fritt Ord Zeitsstiftung Eastern Europe Press Prize in Oslo earlier this summer. He is also known for spreading information about the graves of identified soldiers in Pskov region, appearing in August 2014. After this information was known, he was also severely beaten. As deputy, Schlossberg has required the Russian authorities to investigate the death of the soldiers. Lev Schlossberg also participated in delivering a complaint to the Russian Supreme Court in June 2015 regarding a new law amendment which prohibits announcement of the numbers of military losses during peacetime. Further, Schlossberg has frequently raised attention about the cases of corruption in the region, the need to control the use of budget resources. He has criticized law amendments which limit and violate the freedom of assembly, the freedom of association, and the freedom of expression. Schlossberg has thus repeatedly raised his voice in protection of Russian civil society groups and of Russian citizens. Yesterday, 41 of his fellow deputies voted to have his mandate lifted halfway into the period. The Norwegian Helsinki Committee urges the Russian authorities to stop all political pressure against legally elected deputies in general, and Lev Schlossberg in particular. We urge Russian authorities to guarantee personal security and safe and professional working conditions for Schlossberg and other independent voices. We urge Russian authorities to investigate the lawfulness of the initiative from the local authorities in Pskov and the connection of the governor Andrei Turchak in this regard. We also urge all OSCE participating states to maintain the pressure with targeted sanctions against individuals and entities in the Russian Federation, and to consider the establishment of a global Magnitsky mechanism. Human rights defenders, whistleblowers, and independent journalists are amongst those who contribute to a society with transparent processes, accountability, and equal political competition where the electorate is given a real choice. This is not the case in Russia today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. One kind organizational reminder is that there are allocated seats for civil society with microphones, and just so that there's no misunderstanding on whose behalf one might be speaking, that those positions be taken. Thank you very much. And the next speaker on the speakers list is the delegation of the United Kingdom. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The United Kingdom fully supports the statement made by Spain on behalf of the European Union and its member states, and would like to make a few national remarks. This year, the UK is celebrating the 800th anniversary of the sealing of Magna Carta, an event that marked the first step on the UK's journey towards parliamentary democracy as we know it, and respect for individual rights. It was a foundation of the democratic values and many of the rights and freedoms that our citizens enjoy today. That our journey has taken 800 years reminds us that the road to democracy is an evolutionary process. The UK has a long history of sharing experience, and last week the UK's Minister for Human Rights launched a new and agile fund, Magna Carta Partnerships, to deploy UK or international expertise to help support countries in political transition or crises. It is part of a wider range of the UK's approaches to building a rules-based international system that upholds democratic values. Madam Moderator, Freedom House's 2014 report suggests that global freedom declined for an 8th consecutive year. Some states, including in the OSCE, are opting for less democratic forms of government and restricting the space for independent civil society. We should all speak out against those negative trends. Not only have OSCE participating states agreed common commitments to uphold democratic principles, experience demonstrates that where the rule of law and democratic values are upheld, prosperity flourishes and the risk of instability is minimized. Democracy is, in short, in all of our national interests. The holding of free and fair elections is, of course, one of the most common celebrations of democracy. No participating state has a perfect record when it comes to holding democratic elections, and we can all benefit from ODIHR's independent, impartial, and systematic methodology. We call on all participating states to abide by their commitments and to cooperate with ODIHR before, during, and after election observation missions. There should be no conditions, no preconditions, and no exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. Next, we have the Russian Federation to be followed by the Czech Republic. The floor is yours, sir.
Distinguished Madam Moderator, distinguished colleagues, the OSCE disposes of a strong set of electoral commitments which the Russian Federation duly observes in holding democratic elections. We regret that despite the existing foundation for the electoral process in the form of the Copenhagen document of 1990 approved by all participating states, there is still no legal foundation for the organization's observation of elections. The lack of uniform and agreed rules leads to varying assessments by ODIHR's monitoring missions, which are sometimes politicized and lacking in objectivity. The Bureau presents in an uncritical light the elections' results in Western European countries, Canada, and the USA, despite the problems there with access by international observers, problems with voter registration, and ineffective legal protection in the examination of electoral disputes. This is a case of double standards in the Bureau's activities. Another flaw is found in ODIHR's imposition of monitoring conditions. We are not satisfied with the manner in which the Bureau organizes election monitoring. We are surprised that in 2013 for Germany, only 2 ODIHR experts were considered sufficient for 62 million voters, but that now ODIHR finds 130 observers insufficient for 5 million voters in Azerbaijan. The result, it seems to us, is that ODIHR recognizes in the OSCE area there are societies with ideal democracies with no problems. In 2007, Russia, together with its partners in the CSTO, proposed a draft on basic principles of observation of national elections in accordance with OSCE ODIHR. However, EU member states and the US refused to examine this draft because it allegedly encroaches upon the autonomy of ODIHR. At the same time, in 2012, the Bureau, in the absence of a decision by OSCE executive bodies, joined in the Declaration on Global Principles of Non-Party Observation and Monitoring of Elections by Non-Government and Civil Society Organizations. Distinguished colleagues, democratic elections in contemporary states are impossible outside the information space, where voters are addressed by candidates and political parties on the one hand and by electoral organizers, election organizers on the other. Our experience of organizing national elections shows that it is precisely the media that significantly influences both the results of election campaigns by political parties and voter turnout at voting locations, as well as the openness and transparency of elections, which is vital for creating trust in the electoral system. Creating the best and most comfortable conditions for the work of journalists is necessary so the OSCE participating states may fulfill their commitments in the elections area. These broad rights of journalists covering elections should be accompanied by responsibilities that must be observed to protect both the electoral process and the reputations of the journalists themselves. However, elections organizers still commit violations in this area. I refer specifically to non-observance of the principle of equality of access to media by candidates and political parties, the sending of pseudo-journalists to election commissions, and on-the-air provocations. We believe it of great importance that members of the media observe a code of professional journalistic ethics during elections. This would establish moral guidelines to be observed in order to protect the journalists' reputations. The increased demand by political parties for high-quality work by journalists during elections is a strong stimulus to the development of the media. However, the authorities, as the sole organizer of elections, should not expect magical self-regulation by the market of information services. Experience in both developing and developed countries shows that the only result of such magic, as a rule, is the total disappearance of intrigue at elections in favor of a contest not between political parties, but rather in the scale of the paymasters. We are convinced that it is necessary for there to be a regulatory function by state authorities so that public financing can create additional demand on the market for information services during elections. This would allow for objective and reliable information. With respect to the examination of citizenship and political rights, I'd like to once again recall participating states, the HCNM and the ODIHR, that in the area of the OSCE, and specifically in Latvia and Estonia, there remains a category of the population who are called non-citizens. And they do not have electoral rights. They must be returned to these people. Thank you.
The next speaker on the list is the Czech Republic, and that will be followed by the Union of Women of Russia. The Czech Republic, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The Czech Republic aligns herself with the intervention delivered by the European Union and the recommendations made on all the described topics. We appreciate the high professional standards and expertise of the ODIHR. A full ODIHR's autonomy is absolutely necessary to effectively assist participating states in the implementation of the OSCE human dimension commitments. Election observation remains a cornerstone of ODIHR's activities. This year belongs to one of the busiest election observation years. The Czech Republic contributed with its long-term and short-term observers to all OSCE election observation missions in 2015. Czech observers will also participate in the upcoming important elections in Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, and Turkey. Unfortunately, selected Czech observers could not be deployed to Azerbaijan for the upcoming parliamentary elections. We regret the decision of the government of Azerbaijan to drastically limit the number of invited observers, which compelled ODIHR to cancel the election observation mission. ODIHR simply cannot conduct a credible election observation mission with just 6 long-term observers in the whole country. The Czech Republic continues to cooperate with different electoral-oriented non-governmental organizations, including the International Foundation for Electoral Systems. We are glad that IFES has chosen Prague for the seat of its regional office for Europe, and we have gladly welcomed many National Elections Commission's representatives from Eastern Partnership states in Prague, participating in different IFES training programs and seminars. The highlight of the cooperation between IFES and the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs was the successful conference on the 25th anniversary of the first democratic elections in Czechoslovakia, which was organized together by IFES and the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs in June this year in Prague. Promotion of election rights and full implementation of Article 25 of the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights belongs to long-term priorities of the Czech Republic in the human rights and democracy support area. That is why we presented in 2013 and 14 the resolution on equal participation in political and public affairs to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. The resolution was supported by the overwhelming majority of OSCE participating states as co-sponsors. At the current Human Rights Council, we are presenting once again an updated resolution. This year, the resolution is recognizing the need for further work on the full and effective implementation of the right to participate in public affairs. The resolution also recognizes new forms of participation, in particular through new information and communication technologies and social media. Thank you for your attention.
And thank you very much for your intervention. Next on the list, we have the Union of Women of Russia, to be followed by the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. So to the Union of Women of Russia, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I represent a non-governmental organization called the Union of Women of Russia. I'm a regional leader in the Amur Oblast in the far east of the country. Now, when I was preparing for this presentation, I wrote a lot. I mean, that has been distributed and it will be available. The moderator has asked us to speak off the cuff, so I'm pleased to be able to do that. And I hope that this will make the voice of women to be heard. I must say that I'm very surprised when our partners from outside the country, without really knowing the essence, start to moralize and give us lessons. When they say that the authorities of Russia should be ensuring democracy, well, I mean, the executive, the president, cannot take someone's position away if they're an elected representative. Only the parliament itself can do that. Now, I also support sanctions against Russia. It's a wonderful thing. The more sanctions there will be, the more unified we will become. Thank you for the sanctions. But if we're going to talk about democracy, let me share some thoughts with you about the kind of democracy that we have in the Amursk Oblast in the Far East, which has a population of just 800,000. We have extraordinary achievements in just 20 years of democratization, or just a bit more. More than 50% of elected representatives are women. In the ministers at the regional level, 42% are women within the regional government. And at the present time, for a year now, we've had a law in place about community control or societal control, and I think that any region could be proud of that. In June of this year, that law was enacted. In accordance with this law, at absolutely all levels, the local level, the regional level, the federal level, we have these community councils, and I can share some figures with you. I think they'll be of interest to you. Thanks to these councils that now exist, that control the authority, that oversee or monitor the powers that be at all levels, and thanks to that, by revealing some dubious transactions, we have managed to save more than 70% of the regional budget. We, the Soviets, I mean, why do I say we? Because women have become members of all of these community councils. We have Union of Women of Russia representatives on all of them. And thanks to us, at the present time, in the Amurskaya Oblast, there are 700 cases about corruption, and more than half of them have been initiated thanks to the community councils. And of the cases brought by the prosecutor on violations of rights of business people, again, about half of them are thanks to the community councils. So I think really that this meeting of the OSCE should change direction or orientation. I mean, every state has its own problems, its own mentalities, but maybe we should exchange our positive experiences and learn from one another. Thank you very much. Thank you, says the moderator.
And human rights, which will be followed by the delegation of Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Ahmad Shaidov. I represent Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. I want to talk about the parliamentary election to be held on November 1st in Azerbaijan. I attach special importance to the topic that we discussed today. This is because elections are an important stage of democratization and development of each society. There is no use of talking about a brighter future if the transparent elections are not in place. As you may know, on November 1st this year, Azerbaijan will have parliamentary elections. This is why today's topic is important for us as well. Because of this, elections environment is felt in Azerbaijan. Regretfully, OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and other organizations refused to send election observers, and this fact concerns us deeply. Absence of international observers increases burden of local observers and human rights advocates. I think Azerbaijan and OSCE should reach consensus and facilitate deployment of international observers for carrying out election observation mission. Considering the current situation, Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights will mobilize its sources to carry out observation mission at 70 election points out of 125. And for this purpose, we have accredited 70 representatives. Firstly, pre-election environment in Azerbaijan is normal. And in accordance with election code of Azerbaijan, a citizen at the age of no less than 25 years can run his or her candidacy with no restriction. Registration of candidates will continue until October 2, and starting from October 9, election campaign will be started. I hope Azerbaijan government will create necessary conditions for candidates for the election campaigns. Taking this opportunity, I would like to inform you that I have run my candidacy as well to closely observe and participate at the parliamentary elections. My candidacy has been officially registered from GAC election point number 112. I will participate at the elections as human rights advocate and candidate. I have a huge burden and expect your kind support in this respect. Addressing to attendees and OSCE officials, I would like to ask your support during election period. This support is important for us to observe elections as human rights advocate and candidate. By Azerbaijan delegation, I would like to address to Azerbaijan government as well. Parliamentary election is another test of democracy for Azerbaijan. Therefore, official Baku has a huge burden in terms of transparently conducting these elections. As a human rights advocate, I would like to note that election falsification and other negative facts during the election will be reported to the international organizations, including OSCE. As a candidate, I will not reconcile with any falsification at my own election point and will raise these violations of election code before international organizations. Therefore, I call on Azerbaijan government to consider these issues and create democratic environment for the elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your statement. Next, we have the delegation of Ukraine to be followed by the European Center for Artsakh.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I would be very glad to speak today about the new progressive legislation that Ukraine has on local elections that we will have on 25th of October, or about new legislation on financing political parties and making them transparent, or about new laws on public consultations. But I can't keep silent when Ukraine is facing the Russian aggression, and part of the citizens in my country will not be able nor participate in elections because they have to stand with guns to protect their territory. Of course, you're all aware about the aggression which started in March 2014. Part of our territory was temporarily occupied, then annexed, and we have now these events in Donbass, which is partly occupied also, and they will not be able to participate in elections. But I want just to give you a few examples on what is happening on the occupied territories with the political rights of the citizens of Ukraine. First of all, it has forced change of nationality. Can you imagine that one day aggressor comes to your home, takes your passport away and says that you're automatically Russian? You had 2 weeks to come to any office and say that you would like to stay Ukrainian. If you didn't manage, then you're an alien, which cannot cross a border, which cannot vote, which cannot get any medical assistance or employment. Secondly, which reminds me medieval times, which happens in Crimea. This is arresting for having the forbidden literature, which can be found in homes of Crimean Tatars, which for years were suffering from deportation from USSR, and now they are again under the complete pressure from the security service of Russian Federation. They are being arrested, abducted, they disappear, and there are many bodies found on the territory of occupied territories, of them dead. I want also to pay your attention to the situation with the people who are facing illegal trials on the territory of Russian Federation, starting from Nadia Savchenko, who is the member of who is a member of Ukrainian Parliament and of the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe. She is a deputy which sits in Russian jail, and she will not have a fair trial because it doesn't exist in Russian Federation. This is Oleg Sentsov, who is a film director who was arrested and now is under torture in Russian jails. And these are numerous hostages of Putin's regime, which face torture in their, and will have no trial there. I want also to pay your attention to the work that Ukraine does in supporting those people. We're creating new legislation to ease the way of them accessing the occupied territories and going out, to registering a baby or death on that territory, just to support our citizens who suffer from occupation. We try to fulfill all the obligations on their OEC reports that we had as recommendations from last year. And of course, I want to say all the words of thanks on behalf of Ukraine to the OEC Human Rights Assessment Mission in Crimea, which in its report of 17 September 2015 has confirmed many of the above-mentioned violations. And the only recommendation from our side is stop Russian aggression. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. The next speaker on the list is the European Center for Artsakh, followed by the Civil Campaign for European Belarus. So, European Center, Artsakh, you have the floor.
Vielen Dank, geehrte Moderatorin, ich werde Deutsch sprechen. Zu den
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak in German, Madam Moderator. I'm going to speak about the free elections in Karabakh. In 2014, during the conference, it was my opportunity to talk to you about democratic processes in Nagorno-Karabakh following the free elections and transparent elections that took part, that were held in the political culture of the Republic. Today, I'd like to update you on the recent elections that took place this year on the 3rd of May. These were the 6th parliamentary elections held in Artsakh. The elections to the 33-seat National Assembly were held under the proportional and majoritarian electoral system. A number of political parties participated in the elections. There were 7 political parties, and experts from 28 states observed. There were a number of observers from the European Parliament, from the German Bundestag, and from other national partners. Also, there were observers from the CSU party. They noted that the elections were held in line with norms and saw them as a step towards strengthening democracy in this country. Another demonstration of the commitment to democratic values and principles in Nagorno-Karabakh are the elections to be held, or that were held rather, on 13 September this year. These were enshrined in the Constitution and corresponded to the European Self-Government Charter. Dear participants, I would also like to talk about the implementation of these elections. They demonstrate the current situation. The reaction of some OSCE participating states to the elections shows a negative take on the democratic processes underway. Now, such a reaction is rather ambiguous. The statements that are mitigated and ambiguous of the representatives of different international structures on the elections in Nagorno-Karabakh have been confusing. At the same time, there has been a kind of indifference on the part of the OSCE faced with this situation, and this is contrary to the concept of comprehensive and cooperative security. With respect to Nagorno-Karabakh, the OSCE has only focused its efforts in the political and military dimension, providing the Minsk Group co-chairs with a mandate to mediate negotiations on the peaceful settlement of the Azerbaijani-Karabakh conflict. The other two OSCE dimensions, that is the economic and environmental as well as human dimensions, remain ignored. I am convinced that the OSCE and its institutions have all necessary tools to support the civil society of Nagorno-Karabakh Republic in its efforts to strengthen democratic values and principles. Thank you.
The next on the speakers list is the Civil Campaign European Belarus, and you have the floor, sir, to be followed by the delegation from Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Andrei Sannikov, Civil Campaign European Belarus. And what will happen in Belarus on the 11th of October in no way can be called an election. It should be called a special operation of the dictatorial regime to keep its power. As the result of a similar operation called Referendum 1996, Lukashenko destroyed the constitution, demolished the parliament, and usurped the power in Belarus. A special operation called Referendum 2004 was organized to remove all limitations from Lukashenko's holding the post of the president, which he legally keeps till this time. The institute of election in Belarus is destroyed. I realized it clearly when I took part in 2010 election as a candidate. That's why I called to peaceful protest against falsifications to bring back elections in Belarus. Lukashenko completely lost the 2010 election, then ordered a violent crackdown of the protest demonstration of many thousands of Belarusian citizens and threw presidential candidates in jail, including me. Today, Lukashenko dictatorship badly needs Western money to save itself. That's why it organized a show called election in order to gain legitimacy. However, 21 years of Lukashenko's rule have proven that any credits and any loans are spent not on people's needs, but on strengthening of the repressive apparatus of the regime. It is that same regime that is guilty of murders of the opposition leaders and journalists, beatings and tortures of its political opponents. Legitimacy of this regime will mean not only a recognition of the power of serial criminals, but also a lawfulness of Russian military presence on the territory of Belarus, which threatens international security. It is no coincidence that Kremlin leaders support Lukashenko so actively. Oh dear OSCE, observers deserved very high reputation in Belarus for their objective reports on previous elections. I am sure that this time they also do understand that instead of election they are offered a very bad show that spectators will not attend. It will be enough to observe the turnout on the day of election to understand that that people do not trust this election, nor its organizer, that dictatorship in Belarus has no support. Belarus can come out from the dead end peacefully with the help of fair election, true election. This is the solution that opposition sees. Today, all opposition democratic forces are united, and they stated that there is no election in Belarus and clearly declared boycott to this. It is the common opinion of the opposition that should serve as the criterion, not only for this election, but also for future relations with Lukashenko's regime. A little bit later, you will also hear the views on the situation in Belarus of Nikolai Statkevich, a colleague of mine, who was released just a month ago, a former political prisoner. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Next, we have the delegation from Switzerland, to be followed by the Belarusian Social Democratic Party, Narodnaya Hromadha. Thank you.
Vielen Dank, Frau Moderatorin.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Switzerland is absolutely convinced that democratic elections are a fundamental pillar of any form of democratic governance. Elections are an opportunity for citizens to make sure that their interests are represented. A challenge not just for Switzerland but also for other states is that there is a weak rate of participation by young people in elections. So Switzerland is trying through the OSCE at the international level but also at the national level to increase the participation of young people. Now, OSCE participating states in 1990 in Copenhagen undertook to organize free and fair elections at reasonable, regular intervals. In Istanbul, 9 years later, we decided that it would be appropriate to have these elections monitored internationally. And now, 25 years after Copenhagen and 16 years after Istanbul, the monitoring of elections by ODIHR and by other organizations remains as important as it was in the past. ODIHR is a trademark of the OSCE, respected within the region and beyond. The electoral monitoring of the ODIHR is a very good methodology. The techniques have been developed and everyone recognizes this. The effectiveness and the credibility of ODIHR can be continued only if the office will be able to continue to do its work without any constraints imposed by participating states. We have proposed certain recommendations about follow-up to election monitoring by ODIHR, but what's extremely important, of course, is that participating states that cooperate fully with ODIHR, they should have an opportunity to be able to react to recommendations made by ODIHR, and in their voluntary reports, they can report on progress made in implementing those recommendations. But ODIHR observation, election observation, is not the ultimate objective. As has been stated by Director Link, the final reports go beyond the actual observation of the election. I mean, they cover certain forms of technical competence, and that is something that must involve civil society as well. And it's up to participating states to make sure that they implement those recommendations and follow up on them. Thank you.
So follow-up, which is one of the questions that we wanted to address at this session today. The next on the list is the Belarusian Social Democratic Party, Narodnaya Hromadha, followed by the delegation of Tajikistan. Please, Mr.
Distinguished participants, distinguished moderator, I am Mr. Statkevich. I represent the Belarus Social Democratic Party, Narodnaya Hromadha. I was a presidential candidate, and during the holding of these elections, I was arrested, and I was sentenced to 6 years in a prison. I was in prison for almost 5 years, and for all of that time, I was pressured to agree to write a statement in which I would have forgiven Lukashenko, and in that case I would have been freed, but I was freed without this because, as I've understood, Mr. Lukashenko needed this for recognition of the presidential elections and wanted to get credit for it from the West. Now, this campaign, the special feature of the Belarusian presidential campaign is that they are falsified from the very stage of putting forward candidacies, and there are obstacles placed to the putting forward of true candidates. So the actual ballots are falsified as well. I am a good example of this. I was freed the very day after the registering of candidates for the presidential elections. Now, when I look at what has happened in my country in the past 5 years, I see that the population is paralyzed by fear. It reminds me of a cemetery, a very calm cemetery. There's one person standing there and he's yelling, "Who's more important than I am? There's no one else here." Well, then I have won fairly and squarely. And there are ghosts of any possible opponents. So the elections in Belarus are a farce. We don't recognize them as true elections, and the only rational reaction to them can only be ignoring them. I believe that this spectacle will end quietly and calmly. We don't have a candidate, and so we don't have the possibility to fight against the falsification that's already taken place. But I believe that it would be dishonest, extremely dishonest, with respect to the Belarusian people, continue that this cemetery-like silence is a demonstration of any progress in the holding of elections. In my view, this silence demonstrates the opposite. We can never, in favor of political games, place as victims the very voters. Thank you.
The next is the delegation of Tajikistan, to be followed by the Russian Public Institute of Electoral Law.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the last parliamentary elections in Tajikistan took place in March of this year with the participation of 8 political parties on an alternative basis, and that gives indubitable witness to the fact that the society of Tajikistan is being democratized and people are exercising power. Together with other parties that have had their representatives in previous sessions of the parliament for the first time in 15 years, we have representatives of the Democratic and Socialist parties of Tajikistan in the parliament, in addition to others. The parliament, therefore, has representatives of 6 political parties of the 8 that exist working on legislation. More than 500 election observers from more than 40 countries of the world, including 150 and more from the OSCE's ODIHR, observed the election. According to the Central Electoral Commission, in the period of the preparation for the election, there was very close cooperation with ODIHR, and we're grateful to ODIHR for that. Insofar as the results of the parliamentary elections are concerned, the 31 recommendations have been submitted by ODIHR for further improvements in the electoral process in Tajikistan. Many of those points are worthy of very close attention, and the various entities of Tajikistan are currently at work on that process. Some other points in the recommendations concern certain constitutional and legislative standards, and so they will need to be analyzed and studied in greater depth and detail before action is taken. But Tajikistan is leaving no stone unturned to implement the recommendations of the ODIHR, following the presidential elections of 2013 and the parliamentary elections of March of this year. All Tajikistan, in order to improve its electoral process, intends very closely and actively to cooperate with all national and international non-governmental organizations. And in closing, I would like to make the following recommendations. In order to improve the quality of electoral processes, it would be appropriate for ODIHR to participate and to organize training seminars for members of national and regional electoral commissions. And ODIHR could also extend technical assistance to Tajikistan to set up a unified register of voters. That would be very useful, and that's been mentioned in other documents. Thank you very much. Thank you for the concrete recommendations.
Russian Public Institute of Electoral Law, to be followed by the delegation from Belarus. Sir, you have the floor.
Thank you, distinguished participants, distinguished speakers. We have examined a number of OSCE documents with recommendations for participating states on the holding of elections. However, in practice, without clear criteria and standards for observation, the situation is quite difficult, and the monitoring missions of ODIHR more often are yielding scandals. For example, the situation in Azerbaijan, we notice that there have been issues with the transparency in other OSCE states, such as the UK. Let us try to look briefly at the problems that exist in the OSCE. As was justly noted at the meeting, the ODIHR methodologies must be simplified. We cannot have a selective application, and we don't want to see the ODIHR as an electoral inquisitor of the 21st century. The ODIHR has issued a handbook on electoral observation, but unfortunately, it does not provide principles for assessing democratic elections in participating states. We note that in formulating their conclusions, there are issues with corruption. One example is that our institute for 3 years has been trying to receive from ODIHR a copy of the forms filled out by the short-term observers in the Russian Federation 3 years ago, and we are unable to obtain this information. The OSCE documents refer to fulfilling OSCE commitments as well as commitments to other international organizations. In practice, we would like for ODIHR to pay attention to the CIS standards on the holding of elections. Now, CIS missions do not allow for the formulation of recommendations before the mission is complete. We believe that it is necessary to reformulate ODIHR's working methods. In parallel, the OSCE, without a decision on the part of its participating states, needs to adhere to other international principles in the area of elections observation. Now, unfortunately, ODIHR's methodologies formally or in any other way do not correspond to other international commitments. So how can elections be held? We are ready to discuss this in greater detail in the next room after this meeting. We invite you.
Just to mention that the CIS Convention is one of the aspects that we look at in our reports. That's documented in many of the reports that we've issued previously. The next speaker on the list is the Republic of Belarus, and to be followed by the Human Rights Center Vesna.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator. As all of you know by now, in accordance with the decision of the Belarusian Parliament, the election of the President of the Republic of Belarus will be held on 11th October 2015. The forthcoming presidential election is a paramount political event for the whole Belarusian society and state. The authorities of Belarus are sincerely interested and committed to conducting free and fair election in line with the national legislation and international commitments of our country. The election will be held on the basis of the electoral code, to which in 2012-2013 a number of amendments was introduced, including those based on the previous ODIHR's recommendations. Minsk, I would assure you that Minsk doesn't look like any political cemetery. The campaign is progressing and the registered presidential candidates are currently engaged in the agitation work. I would like to point out that with 4 candidates running for the presidency, there is a genuine choice for the people of Belarus in this election. Moreover, there were 8 candidates who initially participated in the campaign, but some of them, including 2 leaders of political parties, they just couldn't collect enough signatures to support their candidacy. The timely invitation of a wide range of international structures, including the OSCE, both the ODIHR and the Parliamentary Assembly, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the CIS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, to observe the upcoming election, proves our genuine intention to fulfill the respective OSCE commitments. The Belarusian authorities will cooperate with and provide, if needed, the required assistance to all international observers. We will create all the conditions necessary for their efficient work. In our turn, we count on an unbiased approach by the international observers and expect an objective assessment of the election, which, along with critics, would reflect the positive features of the campaign and the progress achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next on the speakers list is the Human Rights Center Vesna, to be followed by the Baltic Center of Historical and Socio-Political Research. Vesna, you have the floor.
Good day, dear colleagues. I'm delighted to be here with you at this important forum. I represent an independent group that monitors elections and works for free and fair elections. The elections for the president in this year are taking place at a time when the socioeconomic situation is deteriorating. There's a lot of tension, and according to a recent decree of the president, there were a number of people who were released and certain others who were released later on in August and then in September. Candidates for the presidency for the last presidential elections had their right to leave the country returned. Now, given the deterioration of the situation in human rights in the country, that could become an impetus for the authorities to introduce certain reforms. Now, we believe that criminal proceedings against any of the individuals concerned should be brought to an end. I mean, they've been released, but there still is the threat of returning them to the prison. Now, as to the elections, We feel that the recommendations of the OSCE following the last election campaign have not really been taken into consideration. And in fact, some of the changes introduced in 2014 have changed the overall climate of the electoral campaign. The request for human rights defenders that they be able to be present at the counting of votes was something that was rejected by the Electoral Commission. The main organizers of the elections are pro-governmental civil society organizations, which make up some 35% of the members of the electoral commissions. Only 6% of members come from the opposition, and this means that we have very little opportunity to influence the situation. In Minsk, where 20% of voters live, there isn't a single member of an opposition group or an independent NGO. I mean, this is much worse than in previous presidential elections. So in trying to pretend that there is a competitive presidential campaign, the authorities are nevertheless maintaining full control over the overall process. And by the members of the initiative group, when we were wanting to collect signatures, we were subject to a lot of administrative obstruction. There is this stage then of illegal agitation supporting presidential legislation. This is done on the basis of state resources. The mass media are deprived from obtaining access to objective information, and there are unlimited resources available for those who support Lukashenko. So we would call on the authorities not to put administrative pressure on voters, forcing them to vote, and to ensure that there be transparent counting of the votes, what has not been the case in the past. It should be possible for monitors to have access to all voting votes, otherwise we won't be able to talk about free and fair elections. Thank you for that.
Research, which will be followed by the Information Group on Crimes Against the Person. Baltic Center, you have the floor, please.
Madam Moderator, dear participants in this conference, in October of next year in Latvia, we will be celebrating, so to speak, a very sad jubilee. It will be exactly 25 years to the day from the time when universal suffrage will have been liquidated. 893,000 permanent residents, that is more than 30% of the population, were deprived 25 years ago of the right automatically to become citizens of the Latvian Republic. This became possible through the refusal by Latvia to implement the internationally recognized right freely to choose one's citizenship, and also refusal to implement the final Helsinki CSCE Act of 1975. This means that the last elections in Latvia with universal suffrage took place on 18 March 1990. The refusal by Latvia to guarantee universal suffrage puts into question the democratic nature of any elections or referenda held in Latvia in the period from 1991 through to the present day, and also put into question the legitimacy of the bodies of authority or of power at all levels and any decisions taken by them. Apart from that, the rejection of universal suffrage has predetermined the development of the political system in Latvia and moved it in the direction of legalized radicalism and neo-Nazism. At the same time, there has been broad-ranging pressure put on the rights of national minorities, in particular their right to obtain education in their national language, their freedom of expression, and their freedom of movement. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, in its decision of 8 November 2002, came to the conclusion that in Latvia there is a long-term democratic deficit, and the European Parliament, in its decision of 8 September 2015, recognized that persons without citizenship are victims of discrimination in connection with their non-receival of citizenship. Now, in the light of the above, it is quite striking that there is a passive position adopted by the OSCE when it comes to the holding of elections without universal suffrage in Latvia and Estonia. Now, it is very regrettable that this position is taken advantage of by the powers that be in Latvia and Estonia as a support for their approach to allow for massive statelessness in their country and not to provide for universal suffrage. Now, on the basis of the decision of the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly of 8 November 2002 and the decision of the European Parliament of 8 September 2015, I would call on ODIHR of the OSCE to bring about a liquidation of this situation of massive statelessness in Latvia and the Institute of Stateless Persons in Estonia, and make sure that universal suffrage is returned to those countries. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, says the moderator.
By the Interregional Social Movement for Democracy and Human Rights, IGCP, you have the floor.
I'm Maxim Vilkov, the information group against the person. So during our work, we are constantly recording the facts of limitations of the basic rights and freedoms of citizens. For instance, the right to freedom of assembly and expression in the territory of Ukraine. As you all know, on the 25th of October in Ukraine, there will be local elections. Let's take a look at the conditions under which these elections will be held. The fact is that the Ukrainian government, in a totally justified manner, criticize the former Ukrainian authorities under President Yanukovych for using force against those participating in protests. However, I must note that in the last year and a half, the situation in Ukraine has worsened dramatically. Now, I carry out monitoring as a part of a Ukrainian center of research on the social protests, pickets, and so on that take place in Ukraine and the negative response of the government authorities to these protests. Here are some figures. Before the beginning of Euromaidan, for every 100 protests, there were 80 strong reactions on the part of the authorities. But in the period after Maidan, and I'm referring to this year, there have been 57 such reactions on the part of the authorities. So we see a very sad trend. We call upon the OSCE and international human rights defense organizations to pay attention to the escalation of a government reaction and a strong reaction to protests and to their violations of the free expression of citizens. We consider these violations of basic rights and freedoms can lead to an increased wave of violence within and outside the country. Thank you.
On the list is the Interregional Social Movement for Democracy and Human Rights. This will be followed by the Historical Memory Foundation. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Я хотела бы тоже...
I would also like to say a few words about the elections that will be held in Ukraine in October of this year, end of October. I'd like to express, or rather draw attention to the danger that these elections will not be democratic in nature. Now, if we look at the elections last year, in 2014, we saw a number of systematic attacks on representatives of opposition parties, and this took place with the knowledge of a local and sometimes the participation of local authorities. And some of the victims of these attacks were women, the elderly, and teenagers who were distributing leaflets of some of the more popular opposition parties. Now, I could give you a few examples of cases. In Nikolaevki on the 1st of October, a few people attacked a stand, and this was where a campaigning was taking place. And we received information about agitators who were working in other parts of Nikolaevki where attacks took place as well. Representative of local authorities also threatened opponents. The head of the Dnipropetrovsk administration, Filatov, in his public speeches before students and on social media, commented on the activities of the opposition and made threats to the opposition. You can see this on his social media pages. And he called on battalions to fight against the opponents. And the 19th of October in Cherkassk, a number of people in camouflage uniforms from Right Sector and Azov attacked the independent candidate as well as his guards, and there was a journalist who also suffered. Now, apart from the holding of the elections themselves, it was possible to see how the observers of opposition parties were forbidden entrance to the voting locations, and sometimes the police were protecting voters of the opposition. Such cases take place frequently, often with the participation of local police. And now, recently, the last attack that I mentioned that took place yesterday in Krivom Roge and in Odessa, and the day before yesterday in Kharkov, there was also someone in a uniform who, in a barbarous manner, attacked the home of the former governor of Kharkov and made demands and expressed a desire that the current mayor not be re-elected. So I'd like to draw the attention of the OSCE to what is really happening with these elections and the situation of monitors and observers. Thank you. Thank you very much.
To kindly keep to the time, since we still do have a number of speakers on our list. The next is the Historical Memory Foundation, and this will be followed by the Georgian Institute for State Modernization. So the Historical Memory Foundation, you have the floor.
Уважаемые коллеги, я надеюсь...
Distinguished colleagues, I will not take much of your time. I think that you will agree with me that some problems should be nipped in the bud, as we say, and not solved ex post facto. We know about the existence of this shameful status of non-citizen in Latvia and Estonia, where these people are deprived of their right to vote. Unfortunately, in recent times, there have been calls to the forming of such categories of people who are deprived of a number of their legal rights. And we hear calls for the creation of such a category in Ukraine. We have heard this on a number of occasions. And this comes from representatives of the Verkhovna Rada. It is discussed in the media as well as by representatives of the right-wing movement. At the end of July of this year, in the media, we saw information to the effect that the Ukrainian government is drafting a new law on citizenship, in which specifically there could appear a provision related to limitations on civil rights. If we look at Ukrainian media and reports on this legislation, and I quote, it refers to the demonstration of patriotism on the part of citizens and physical persons who live without the status of citizen, who are stateless persons. Now, I would like to raise the question as to whether the Ukrainian authorities understand that anti-democratic measures are absolutely unacceptable. And I hope that if this initiative is introduced in the Verkhovna Rada, and I hope it doesn't come to this, but if it is introduced, that it will be buried there. That is my hope. I would like to draw the attention of those here to this issue so that you may monitor this and not allow such problems to develop, which could potentially be very significant for democracy in this country. Thank you.
Spasiba. Next, we have the Georgian Institute for State Modernization. This will be followed by the European Platform for Democratic Elections. Georgian Institute, you have the floor.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, dear delegates, I'd like to speak about the legislative gaps and problems concerning election system in Georgia. First of all, I'd like to emphasize the importance of parliamentary elections in 2012, which was the first exemplary case, not only in Georgia, but also in the whole region, when the power was transferred by peaceful, by democratic means. Unfortunately, due to the Russian occupation, Georgia does not have possibility to hold the democratic, peaceful elections in its Abkhazian and Skin Valley regions. Despite the above-mentioned success, further progress is of course needed. The existing election code and election system does not ensure adequate reflection of people's will. Existing majority election system does not ensure an equal and fair environment for newly established or small political entities to participate. With the majority election system, small parties have no chance to win a mandate unless there are some constituencies with a population having political views differing much from those in the rest of the country. Therefore, the majority election system will inevitably lead to parties uniting or building blocks until only two major players remain on the political scene. So voters are forced to select between the candidates of two big parties, basically. While this tends to create a stable parliamentary majority for the government, it is not likely to represent a pluralistic, modern society adequately. It also should be mentioned that civil society, as well as the political groups, are already agreed that the existing election system should be modified, not taking into account a number of exceptions, mainly the members of parliament from majority party, who actually have the decisive role to adopt the new election code. Last but not least, we believe that support of the OSCE and the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights in this process is crucially important. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your intervention. Next, we have the European Platform for Democratic Elections, and after that, the European Youth Forum. EPD.
I'm representing the European Platform for Democratic Elections, a network of 14 citizens' election observation organizations in countries of the European Union, the 6 countries of the Eastern Partnership, and the Russian Federation. First of all, I want to remember that whilst we are sitting here, EPD board member Anna Mamadli, the director of the Election Monitoring and Democracy Study Center in Baku, is already the 2nd year imprisoned. He's imprisoned for reporting election fraud during the presidential elections in Azerbaijan in 2013. This situation is scandalous, and I express my hope and expectation that next year, while we are coming here, Anna Mamadli will be with us. Citizens' election observation has been invented and developed as a tool to assist authorities and states to improve their election processes. I'm glad to say that in the majority of the countries where EPD is active, the administration take benefit from the recommendations of citizens' election observers. And that is why we are working. Still, we have to observe that a considerable number of countries does not perceive citizens' election observers as a chance to improve election processes, but as a threat to the legitimacy of unjustified power. In the EPD region, these concerns and prominent representatives of this type of regimes are the Russian Federation, Azerbaijan, and Belarus. Citizens' election observers in those countries face manifold problems. Let me just mention 3 of them. On the legal level, we observe repressive NGO legislation and imperfect election legislation, which is hindering citizens' election observers to exert their duty. On the administrative executive level, we observe persecution of election observers through house searches, criminal persecution on the basis of fabricated cases. And finally, on the political level, we observe an increasing trend of fake observation. This is election observation missions which are not working according to international agreed norms and standards. So we want to call on the countries, on the government of Azerbaijan, free all political prisoners, free Anna Mammadli. We call on the Russian Federation, enable a legal environment in which citizen election observers can work. Stop the foreign agents law. Stop the law on undesirable organizations. We call on Belarus, implement the latest ODIHR recommendations and the recommendations done by citizens election observers. Give election observers a real chance to observe the election process. Finally, we call on international institutions as ODIHR, as the European Parliament, as the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, organize a strong screening of international election observation missions, prevent any international election observation missions that might run risk to be politically misused and that may be used to legitimate faked observations. As a rule, we should not have politically short-term observation without a technically observation of ODIHR. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for those very concrete points responding to one of the concrete questions in our agenda. Next, we have the European Youth Forum to be followed by the OSCE Youth Ambassador. European Youth Forum, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Free and fair, secure democratic elections are indeed the basis of healthy democracies. But today I also want to address those countries who already have this in place. Well-functioning, healthy democracies is not something which is secured as soon as it is developed. It is crucial that every single generation learn the skills needed to act democratically, reflect, participate, and engage in dialogue. Young people has never been more politically engaged than they are today. But we are facing a serious challenge. There is a rapid decline in the voting turnout regarding young people. We need to engage young people in already existing structures of democracy, and we need to engage more young people in elections. In order to ensure the future generations of democratic citizens, it's important that states ensure mandatory citizenship education for young people so new generation learns to think critical, engage in politics, and get the skills to participate in society. We call for countries to lower the voting age to 16 so young people can decide on matters that influence them. We need to establish permanent youth input structures to ensure end-to-end involvement of young people in policy making. Here, the co-management system on youth issues in the Council of Europe is an important example of best practice. Then I need to underline the support of independent democratic youth organizations, which is needed so young people can act in democratic structures and express themselves in open and safe environments. We need to ensure that we also have democracies in the future. And we need to take young people serious and involve them in decision-making processes and political decision-making bodies. Thank you very much.
And thank you, and also for the concrete points that you have made. Next, we have the OSCE Youth Ambassador. Afterwards, the All-Ukrainian Public Organization Civic Network Opora. So, OSCE Youth Ambassador, for you.
Thank you, Madam President. My name is David Jan Boskert. I'm the Youth Ambassador, OSCE Youth Ambassador of Belgium, and I'm one of the 57 Youth Ambassadors appointed by the Swiss Presidency back in 2014. Luckily, our Youth Ambassador initiative has been continued by the Serbian Presidency of this year, and we hope to see it continued in the next presidencies to follow. First of all, we would like to, rather than being very theoretical, we would like to give you some practical examples of successful and efficient initiatives which have managed to get youth involved in democracy, which is what we're all here for. First of all, we'd like to quote the initiatives of the youth advisory groups, which have been created in several OSCE missions, including the OSCE field mission to Bosnia and Herzegovina. This involved the active participation of a youth ambassador from that country, and we believe that this Youth Advisory Group initiative could be enhanced and exported to other field missions as well. Secondly, we'd like to quote the creation and the persistence of the Central Asian Youth Network, which does exist and is actively supported by the OSCE Program Office in Astana. This youth network brings together more than 3,000 youth from the Central Asian region, and we believe that it does greatly enhance regional cooperation and gives the opportunity to young people of the region to learn democratic skills from another. We believe that an internationalization of this initiative could be very useful, and that annual gatherings would be useful as well to give it more continuity and to enhance its presence and persistence. Thirdly, a point that we hold very dear is the election monitoring by young people in elections. This process would enable that young people engage actively with democracy and see how democracy is done in practice. It not only builds capacity, but it will engage young people for later in democracy and give them a sense of what the active participation in democracy entails. We would strongly like to advocate the youth democracy through election monitoring for young people by young people in regions monitored by the OSCE. Furthermore, we encourage all delegations to join the group of Friends of Youth and the drafting process of the Action Plan of Youth and Security, given that it is important that young people are given a voice in an institutionalized way in this very platform, ODIHR, and the OSCE structures. Nothing should be decided about us without us, and as such, the young people and the Youth Ambassador Initiative have their merit in being continued in the next years. We have a strong hope and strong desire for this to be continued in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and also for the concrete recommendations that you put forward. Next, we have the All-Ukrainian Public Organization Opora, followed by the Fund for Development of Parliamentarianism in Kazakhstan. Opora, you have the floor.
Thank you. To begin with, I would like to react to some of the statements that have been made by representatives of non-Ukrainian organizations that claim to know more about Ukraine than representatives of NGOs that are registered in my country. The statements that have been made are not consistent with reality. They simply amount to Russian propaganda that is being presented here as serious statements. But this is simply connected with people dying. In 2013 and 2014, there have been many cases of if I understand the propaganda mathematics, where 100 people being killed on Maidan is an incident. But let me turn to some other more serious points.
Intervention and terrorist threat in Donetsk and Lugansk region has caused several waves of large-scale internal displacement in Ukraine. There are 1.2 million internally displaced persons registered in Ukraine who has the right to vote. PACE resolution as of January 27, 215 urges the Ukrainian authorities to respect the right of IDPs to make a free choice as to whether to return home, integrate into the local community or resettle in other place of the country, as well as assist of the choice. Ukraine should provide guarantees for integration of these people in new territorial communities and empower them to influence on the national and local decision-making. The task related to integration of IDPs have acquired special importance due to the local election. A number of NGOs, including Opora, initiated a broad-scale discussion on the need to ensure voting rights of IDPs and prepare a draft law. This draft law provided IDPs with the right to vote on accordance with the place of residence specified in the certificate of registration and specified that they have to file a personal request. In this respect, IDPs only change their voting address, as the registration address will still refer of the occupied territories. Thus, IDPs will not lose their legal connection with the place they used to live before this displacement, and for sure will keep their mobility, will be able to visit relatives, sell properties, etc. We proposed a declaration principles of participation in local election for those IDPs who, among other options for planning their future, have chosen to integrate into new local communities. It is important to prevent indirect discrimination of IDPs in terms of realization of their constitutional rights to elect local governments. In the times of Russia aggression, participation in elections should be viewed as an important tool for the integration of society and IDPs. The participation of IDPs in the election at all levels is an essential mechanism for ensuring not only political but also social and economical rights, guaranteeing prospects for solving a wide range of problems of this group of citizens. If the IDPs don't participate in a local election and if they don't become the subject of local policy, they won't expect to solve their burning problem, which depends on current and strategic activities of local government of Ukraine. Ukraine is a European country, and we shouldn't discriminate IDPs as Russia did it regularly at the IDPs from Chechnya after the war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Next, we have the Fund for the Development of Parliamentarianism in Kazakhstan, which will be followed by the Foundation for the Study of Democracy. Sir, you have the floor.
Well, the further improvement of the legislative basis in Kazakhstan, unfortunately, is not guaranteeing free and fair elections. There are very serious challenges that are an obstacle to the fulfillment of international commitments and standards by Kazakhstan. First of all, the limitation of electoral rights, because citizens don't have a place of residence registration. The system of the Soviet time is preserved in Kazakhstan, and citizens who aren't registered cannot be included on voters' lists, and therefore they don't have the possibility to vote. Second, there is a discrimination of the rights of most citizens to enjoy their electoral rights, given that certain groups of the population are deprived of the right to vote for in the second round of the Majlis members. There are 2 rounds, and participation in the voting is available to all citizens who are 18 years of age, but then in the second round is not on party lists, and here only members of the National Assemblies of Kazakhstan have the right. So there are some who can vote twice around, and others cannot. Third, limitations on the media during the electoral campaign. The media are fully controlled, and so opponents of opposition parties are deprived of the right to inform citizens of their electoral platforms. There are a few print media that are independent, but they're under constant pressure. They're subject to sanctions. Some of them end up being closed. Legal decisions are taken against them with millions of sums seized. And then there is insufficient funding of the electoral campaigns. This is a way of putting pressure on political opponents and on those who extend financial support to them. In point of fact, today in Kazakhstan, supporting opposition political parties and independent media and NGOs is dangerous, and so they are constantly confronted with financial difficulties. 5, holding elections on a premature basis. This is an unacceptable practice which has become systematic in order to cause additional obstacles for the opposition and to do away with pluralism. 6, the ignoring the recommendations of international observers. So what are our recommendations? We call on Kazakhstan authorities to improve the legislation concerning registration of voters, to change the double round system of election that prevails at the present time, to introduce genuine free media, to give greater access to the media for opponents, to do away with the practice of early elections, and to implement the recommendations of international observers. Thank you. Thank you, says the moderator.
We have the Council of Europe on the list after that. Foundation, please.
Distinguished Chairperson, distinguished participants, I'd like to draw your attention to the situation in Moldova. According to the Open Society Fund of Soros, in 2014, a number of observers did not consider the elections to be free and fair, though the OSCE made a positive assessment, though 70% of the citizens of Moldova did not agree. That's the topic for another meeting. Now, in 2014, there were a number of violations during the election campaign. There were 9 million citizens who participated in the election. The party of the former prime minister in 2013 there was an occasion in which a party leader representing 3 million citizens was deprived of his powers due to a corruption scandal. Now, the investigation was not complete. The fact is that both of these parties that I have mentioned were supported by the U.S. and Victoria Nuland, and Senator McCain met with Filatov during his campaign and gave him a positive assessment after he had been removed from the Moldovan parliament for corruption. Another example is that someone from the Patriot Party was found to have falsified results. It's clear that this party was for the independence of Moldova from Russia and from the European Union. Now, during the elections in 2014, leaders of pro-European parties have managed to participate in the disappearance of more than $1 billion from Moldovan banks. And one official clearly stated, and this is a quote, "I went into an alliance with those who made the country independent from foreigners, and this led to the theft of $1 billion. A certain strategist and consultant who works on communications for Senator McCain was paid for their services using this stolen funding. These are obviously gross violations of election law. And the result is that a majority of Moldovan citizens do not consider the elections to have been free and fair. The actions of the United States and the European Union do not increase the trust of the population. And the fact that I referred to of the enormous theft is of great concern. We call for elections with true election observation. Thank you.
3 more speakers listed on the speakers list, and before we turn to a summary from our introducers and to the right of reply, I would ask if anyone is still interested to speak, that the speakers list is still open behind me, and to kindly come up and register your interest. Next on the list we have the Council of Europe, followed by the European Human Rights Advocacy Group. Council of Europe, please take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Dans son rapport 2014 sur l'état de la démocratie,
in the 2014 report on human rights in Europe, the Secretary General of the Council of Europe clearly indicated the principal guidelines of our electoral observation in coming years, strengthening the administration and organization of free and democratic elections, and greater transparency in financing of political parties and campaigns, as well as greater participation of women, both as voters and as candidates, and education on democratic principles for first-time voters, as well as elections observation. During the past year, we have formulated a number of programs of electoral assistance in partnership with the beneficiary countries, as well as with cooperation of civil society representatives. And I refer also to cooperation with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. We have coordinated our activities with other international actors, including representatives of ODIHR and of the OSCE and the UN Commission on Human Rights. I'd like to thank them all for their cooperation. In 2014, in our program in Bosnia-Herzegovina during the general elections, we focused on the participation of women and of youth. In Georgia, on the occasion of local elections, we were especially attached to supporting the efforts of the Central Electoral Commission and of NGOs to strengthen capacity in solving electoral disputes and to sensitize everyone to the limitations on the use of administrative resources, as well as on providing training on elections observation on international European norms. In Moldova, we are cooperating with the Electoral Commission and the Training Center, as well as with the Coordination Center for further training activities. And in our plan of action in Moldova 2013 to 2016, in Ukraine, we have an immediate program which is supported by many members of the Council of Europe. It allowed us in 2014 to observe the presidential and parliamentary elections and to support the main NGOs in their electoral work. Based on the training manual of the Council of Europe, we contributed to the training of some 5,000 national observers who were deployed at each of these elections. These activities are further being developed for the local elections of 25th October, when we will also contribute to the setting up of a media center on the day of the elections. In conclusion, I'd like to inform you about our commitments in the Eastern countries. We have a 3-year plan based on the priorities that I announced at the beginning of my statement, taking into account the specificities of the countries where we're working. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next, we have the European Human Rights Advocacy Group, and then the last speaker that I have on my list is the Committee of Voters of Ukraine. European Human Rights Advocacy Group, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm speaking on behalf of a number of NGOs which have a vast experience in monitoring and observing elections and electoral processes in Armenia, as well as on behalf of a group of lawyers who are specialized in electoral law, bringing disputes before Armenian courts up to constitutional court. I shall address the first provisional question of this session's agenda, as well as partly touch upon also 4 provisional questions of it. The full text of our recommendation will be distributed later. I am drawing your attention on a systemic issue of electoral law and electoral practice in Armenia. According to several reports of foreign and domestic observers, the people of Armenia are deprived of possibility to change its government via means of elections, and in fact they didn't have a success to do so during the entire history of the Republic. There is a strong presumption that the ruling elite managed to falsify the elections during last 2 decades in all elections and referendum, and yet there is not a convincing evidence either of difference of number published or of existence of a scheme that would lead to a conclusion that the results were falsified or forged. And the question may be, how is it possible? And the only possibility is that the only possible and effective evidence for this, which is the signed voters list, is a classified document in Armenia since 2003. There is no effective access of public and parties to this document. All attempts of civil society and oppositional political forces to get these lists published were continuously denied by authorities, including by the Constitutional Court of the country. Please take a note that Armenia has specifics that a large number of its voters lives outside of Armenia, and in accordance with Armenian electoral legislation, they have no possibility to vote during elections outside of Armenia. So, according to reports of some observing organizations, up to 40% live in Armenia. Hence, by classifying the signed lists of voters, the public and participants of elections are effectively deprived of possibility to check and cross-check the information publicized by electoral authorities about the participation in elections. So, and there is no doubt that the votes which could be added to the list goes for the ruling elite. The government says in this regard that it is the opposition parties or observers who should produce the evidence that the numbers publicized by electoral authorities do not reflect the reality. Well, if speaking in the language of electoral disputers, this is an impossible burden to bear, not only for political parties and civil society in Armenia, but as well for any across OSCE region. In a country where the population decreases year by year to an alarming numbers of emigration, the only number that is strangely constant is the number of participation in elections. Our specific recommendation would be in this regard that our specific recommendation to OSCE would be to take note on this very important issue in the eve of constitutional referendum in Armenia and to address it in your statements and reports, because there is a very strong presumption that the referendum is planned to be falsified again if the policy not to publicize these lists is upheld. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for your very concrete recommendation. The last speaker on the list is the Committee of Voters of Ukraine, and with that, the speakers list is officially closed. So I give the Committee of Voters of Ukraine the floor, and then we will follow to the summarization from our introducers. Please.
At today's meeting, a number of provocative statements have been made by the delegation of the Russian Federation, and so I would like to draw attention to the fact that what's been said does not correspond to reality, and also draw attention to the obvious fact that in Ukraine over the last year, the number of political refugees from the Russian Federation is constantly increasing. Russian businessmen, politicians, representatives of civil society organizations are moving to Ukraine. Third, what is sometimes referred to as the specificity of the Russian democracy reminds us more and more of the regime in North Korea. In 2014, in Ukraine, two general election campaigns were held. There were presidential elections and parliamentary elections, and they both had an important characteristic, namely that there was full security for voting citizens, for observers, and for members of electoral commissions. These elections were held during a time of war, during a time of attacks by Russian military forces and terrorist organizations that support the Putin regime. These actions, these military actions, continued even during the day of voting. On the voting day itself, there were cases of peaceful citizens and members of the Ukrainian armed forces losing their lives. And yet the elections were held. They were held in accordance with high democratic standards. They were very positively assessed by observers from international organizations, including observers from the OSCE, and also by national Ukrainian observer groups. It was a year of reform. It was not just a reform of the army, a security reform, a reform of the national police. There were constitutional reforms, and as an integral part of that reform, there was a reform of the electoral code. Ukraine has successfully completed the first stage of its electoral reform. We have moved toward development of pluralism. There are to be quotas for women on candidates lists. There are new standards that ensure full transparency of the electoral process, and so we are very optimistic that local elections will be held at a very high level in accordance with the best democratic standards, and as a result of this, the local and regional governments will work at a higher level, qualitative level. But unfortunately, there are, of course, problems, and there are reasons to fear that after the General Assembly of the United Nations, after the meeting between Putin and Obama, that military confrontation could intensify, and that the security situation may deteriorate, and that could be a danger for local elections. And so the issue of continuing and intensifying sanctions against the Russian Federation is an issue that is of great interest to international organizations and to our NGOs. Thank you for your attention.
We'll now pass the floor to the introducers for any final thoughts on the session before we turn to the right of reply, to which I have 8 speakers on the list at the moment, and that right to reply is still open for those that may be interested. I would then ask Madame Abramikainen to say a few words on the session and any particular elements that she might want to underscore. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear moderator. First of all, I want to thank ODIHR for inviting me and for having possibility to experience this very vibrant discussion with such a variety of opinions. I used to be special coordinator twice during the elections in Turkey, both presidential and elections to the parliament of Turkey, and experienced how important is this combination of long-term observers from ODIHR who collect the information according their provisions, rules, which are not taken from fantasy, but all these rules, provisions are agreed by our governments. So I cannot agree with those who say that, there is no law, there is no impartiality, and so on. I very much agree with those speakers who have supported the independence of ODIHR. And of course, we as OSCE community, we need an independent institution with clear criteria, but not a pocket institution, and the tendencies and wishes to instrumentalize ODIHR or some other institutions of the OSCE are unacceptable. Of course, sometimes when we come to concrete action during the elections, there are other partners as Council of Europe, European Union, sometimes other organizations. It's always a challenge because all of us, we have to find common solution, come to common conclusion. And this is important to be able to do this because our credibility is a tool, for changing the reality and for seeking more democracy around the OSCE. But of course, we live in the time when the main principles of Helsinki are broken, denied especially by one country, and despite of the efforts of this country to paint others in dark colors. It's not convincing, I must say. Much better would be for all of us to look at ourselves and to start making the world better from ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those thoughtful words, which I'm sure provoke some thoughts amongst all of us. Next, I pass the floor to Mr. Ducci for any comments that he may like to make to this session.
Thank you very much, moderator. I'll be brief because I understand that we don't have that much time and the interpreters must be quite tired at the end of at this point of the day. Just a couple of points and then a short conclusion maybe on my side. The 2 points. First, regarding civil society, I would like to say, I had no time to say it in my introduction, that for the European Parliament, working for civil society is definitely a pillar of developing democracy support activities. Not only on election observation, of course, we have already a lot of activities in this respect, but also after that. And for example, in all the activities that we're trying to develop following an election, for example, facilitating a dialogue between an active civil society and the newly elected parliament is one of the issues in which the European Parliament intends to invest, because we have seen in the past that there has been a gap there. We have seen parliaments starting to work without having enough contact with civil society. There are many parts of civil society, and in this respect, I would like to underline that this is a priority for us. Second, concerning the parliaments in general, they have been a little bit absent in the discussion, but maybe for us it's something that we would like to invite everybody to reflect a little bit. We observe election, we observe how parliaments are elected, but then we should make them work. We should facilitate their work. Of course, observing the election is a way to try to be sure or try to assess whether they will be elected in a credible way. But then after that, for sure it is important. And we, as a representative of an international parliament, we would really like member state to consider a little bit more the way to improve relation with Parliament. We're doing that at the European level. I can tell you that Parliament of European Union member states are working with us and are extremely happy to develop capacity building project with the European Parliament in a field where there is a win-win situation, because everybody is absolutely on board and everybody finds a way to improve its working relation. Last point, listening to the various interventions without anticipating on the conclusion, of course, I think that if there is one thing which is rather clear and objective is that if we want to perform election observation, it has to be credible. In order for it to be credible, the bodies doing election observation has to be put in the condition to perform, have enough time to be present in a country and to have enough means to do this election observation, meaning people on the ground and a proper organization. Therefore, it is quite clear from the side of the European Parliament that the crucial work of the ODIHR has to be underlined. And I would like to conclude by saying that on my side, we fully adhere to the statement which was done on behalf of the European Union before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pietro, for some thoughts on how we can improve the impact of the work that we do, and also on the good cooperation between the institutions and how to build that even more widely. Next, we will turn to the right to reply. We have 2 minutes for each of the speakers that are on the list, of which we have 8 at the moment. The first country with the right to reply is Estonia, followed by the Russian Federation. Estonia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Let me respond to the remarks presented earlier regarding the right to vote in Estonia. Since they were not accurate, I would like to clarify some of the issues. Estonia is amongst the few countries where all long-term residents, regardless of their citizenship, have the right to vote in local elections. According to the Local Government Council Election Act of May 1996, citizens of other states and residents who have not yet chosen their citizenship have the right to vote in local administration elections. They must be over 18 years of age and must have been permanent residents for at least 5 years in the territory of the respective local government. As to the false remarks of Estonia having a mass number of people with undetermined citizenship, I would also like to state the following. The Estonian government actively promotes the acquiring of Estonian citizenship through naturalization and has constantly made the acquisition of Estonian citizenship easier in many ways. For example, the latest amendments to the Citizenship Act were approved by the Parliament just now, January 21st, 2015. Amendments guarantee a right to acquire Estonian citizenship by naturalization to all children born in Estonia that have parents with undetermined citizenship. The amendment itself will enter into force from the 1st of January 2016. And as a conclusion, I just like to give the fresh numbers of distribution of the Estonian population by citizenship. As of February 1st, 2015, 84.3% of Estonia's population held Estonian citizenship. 9.4% were citizens of other countries, and only 6.3% were of undetermined citizenship. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much for clarifying that point. The next on the right to reply list is the Russian Federation, to be followed by the Republic of Belarus.
Well, it's a pity that in the statements from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly representative, terms are being used that really do not correspond to what is actually happening in Crimea. We would like to stress the fact that it was the people of Crimea who exercised their right to self-determination that are guaranteed by UN documents. And to talk about annexation, occupation, etc., is simply slander against the people living in that area. And we cannot accept the attempts by Ukraine to change the status of the ICRC and to go against what it has stated about the military conflict as being non-international. Now, the implementation of the Minsk agreements need to be fully implemented, and the Ukrainian authorities are to be through the trilateral contact group to try to make sure that elections are held. Now, we very much hope that the ODIHR will monitor elections in certain elections in the region, but unfortunately the Ukrainian authorities have refused to organize elections in certain territories, and that is contrary to some of the decisions of the Security Council of the UN. Now, there has been a refusal by the Ukrainian authorities to hold elections on 25 October, so the ODIHR will be going to observe elections, yes, but that are not those elections that were called on by the Minsk Agreement and by the resolution of the UN Security Council. Thank you.
Discussions in Minsk, of course, continue, and ODIHR, in the event that there is a political agreement, is, of course, in a position to observe if both sides are able to come to a consensus. The next on the speakers list is Belarus, and that will be followed by Azerbaijan. Belarus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I represent the Central Electoral Commission of Belarus, and this is a rare opportunity for me to use this right of reply. I should like to provide official information with respect to the remarks that were said today by representatives of Vesna Human Rights Center and the EPDE. The Central Electoral Commission of Belarus seriously examines all OSCE recommendations on electoral observation. These recommendations have been issued in two areas: improving legislation and improving the application and practice of this legislation. In recent years, there has been a clearer system developed for the putting together of electoral commissions, and there has been participation by political parties and NGOs in formulating recommendations. We have simplified the conditions for candidates' registration and for their campaigning, and we have increased the right to financing of independent candidates and have provided state guarantees to the free use of state media and television during elections. So each presidential candidate received the right to two free 30-minute addresses on state television and radio during the campaign season, as well as access to publishing in two national newspapers as well as regional newspapers. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that we have analyzed the comments that were made by the OSCE, and we have come to the conclusion that we do need to improve the work of district electoral commissions. We consider that cooperation with experts of the OSCE is a positive, and we are actively working together with the ODIHR mission working in the country. We have weekly meetings during which we provide them with all necessary documentation. I understand that our electoral legislation is not ideal, and the current campaign will provide us with further experience, and we hope to improve the process in future. Thank you. For your comments.
Next is the Republic of Azerbaijan, to be followed by Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. First of all, I would like to exercise the right of reply regarding the comments of the representative of European Center for Artsakh. Azerbaijan once more voiced that this NGO is associated and actively promotes the illegal regime established in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan reiterates in this regard that the separatist regime established by Armenia in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan is ultimately nothing other than the product of aggression and racial discrimination. It is under Armenia's direction and control and survives by virtue of its military, political, financial, and other support. As was confirmed recently by the European Court of Human Rights in its judgment of 16 June 2015 on the case of Chiragov and others versus Armenia. Since my country was mentioned by some distinguished representatives of participating states regarding the ODIHR mission, I just wanted to reiterate, as we have already mentioned, that taking into account election practice in wide OSCE area and ratio of LTOs and STOs to the size of population and electorate, the government of Azerbaijan suggested the OSCE ODIHR revising its NAM report. Unfortunately, the OSCE ODIHR refused to yield to the concerns of Azerbaijan and rejected the proposal to engage in consultations in its debatable recommendations. We believe this decision contradicts the mandate of ODIHR. Just there was one comment by European Platform for Democratic Election, but I just wanted to mention that this organization has never observed election in Azerbaijan, so it was a bit surprising and unclear for us, the outcomes. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And just to make the point that the discussions between ODIHR and Azerbaijan unfortunately did not produce a common viewpoint, but we must again stress that the needs assessment mission recommends on a very concrete basis the number of observers to be deployed to all participating states. Next on the list we have Armenia, followed by Latvia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would try to briefly respond to the European Human Rights Advocacy Center. The assumption and figures presented by this organization on electoral procedures of Armenia contradict international reports, including ODIHR report on last elections in Armenia. The assumption that 40% of Armenians live abroad are simply baseless. And the fact that citizens of Armenia can vote only in Armenia cannot be seen as undemocratic. It simply reflects the certain historic reality. The people who are entitled to get Armenian citizenship may outnumber the inhabitants of Armenia. Therefore, there is this law that only on the territory of Armenia one can cast its vote. And at the end, I would like to turn to the business as usual and to respond to our distinguished Azerbaijani colleague. Second time, Azerbaijan tries to distort the decision of the European Court of Human Rights. The European Court of Human Rights has never said that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh do not have right to hold elections. Quite opposite, in that decision there is a reference to the decision made first in the space of former Soviet Union in 1988. The Parliament of Nagorno-Karabakh initiated the realization of right of self-determination along with other rights. It was a good example of democracy, of the democratic expression of will by people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next on the list for right of reply is Latvia, to be followed by Hungary. Latvia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like to apologize for having to reiterate some basic facts that might have seemed obvious were it not for some statements that deliberately misrepresent the state of democracy and human rights in Latvia. As one would expect of a modern European democracy, the fundamental principle of the Latvian constitution is equal rights for all citizens, regardless of their ethnicity or any other traits. It explicitly guarantees, and this is also implemented in government policies, the right of national minorities to preserve and develop their languages and their ethnic and cultural identity. As for non-citizens, everyone can become a citizen of Latvia through an open and simple naturalization procedure. Unfortunately, due to some personal, sometimes also practical reasons, not all non-citizens have chosen to become citizens of Latvia. Also, for the reasons that the scope of rights of Latvian non-citizens is very close to those of Latvian citizens. The several times simplified naturalization procedure attests to Latvia's firm intention to consolidate and integrate our society and to further develop a broad and inclusive political process. The broad consensus in the Latvian society is that the current simple and liberal naturalization process is the way to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Hungary with the right to reply, followed by Georgia. Hungary, please take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We fully align ourselves with the statement of the European Union, but please let me make some remarks in my national capacity concerning the statement of the distinguished US delegation. The recommendations of the ODIHR regarding the parliamentary elections held on 6 April 2014 carefully examined. Earlier this year, the European Court of Human Rights had a judgment on one of the core elements of the electoral framework on the voting methodology of voting abroad. In this judgment, the court did not find a violation of the European Convention of Human Rights. Parallel with this, there is an ongoing case before the Hungarian Constitutional Court on the same topic. Before submitting an amendment proposal to the Election Act, legislator would like to wait for the outcome of this procedure. In this June, Director of ODIHR, Mr. Mihály Georg Link, visited Hungary and agreed with Hungarian Minister for Foreign Affairs on another possible visit to Budapest later this year in order to negotiate on the implementation of ODIHR recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your input. And then we have the right of reply from Georgia, followed by Ukraine, which is last on the list. Georgia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to use the right of reply and respond to the statement made by the representative from the NGO Georgian Institute for State Modernization. The government of Georgia continues to fulfill its promises, offering the public a plan on the parliamentary electoral system reform, which will provide the conduct of the next as well as its subsequent parliamentary elections in full compliance with democratic electoral principles. The country's next parliamentary elections would be held in the autumn of 2016 under the current election mixed system, but some important changes will be introduced, which would create a more competitive and equal election environment in the country. The government plans to reform the existing majoritarian system, which overrepresents voters from small election districts, by giving districts with greatly differing populations one member of parliament each. The imbalance between district voters would be corrected before the 2016 elections by merging some election districts that have smaller numbers of voters or splitting those with larger voter numbers. The government also plans to impose 50% barrier instead of 30% for the majoritarian election. It will increase the legitimacy of elected MPs. All of these constitutional and legislative decisions for reforming the election system are planned to be made by the end of the year. In the long term, by proposing the constitutional changes, the government is ready to discard the majoritarian system and move to the proportional electoral system for parliamentary elections following the 2016 elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last with the right to reply is Ukraine. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. First of all, replying on the comments about citizenship, which came out from different representatives of some kind of puppet NGOs from Russian Federation, which speaks the words of Kremlin. So I want to underline, as the Deputy Minister of Justice of Ukraine, that there is no such law, and this is a complete lie about that. We create all the laws in line with the European standards because we are now in the process of agreement of association with EU. Secondly, about this self-determination right, which mentioned, I'm just asking a question to everybody here. Is this right of self-determination when the people of the foreign army come with Kalashnikov, and at the end they have 99% result of vote, even without participating of people inside of Crimea? And by the international standards, that should be a national, wide national referendum at all, just to ask this question. This is a complete mistreatment of international law, but we have used to seeing this mistreatment from Russian Federation. And I want to ask just a question. What about Chechnya and their right of self-determination, or about Siberia, where you violently stop any attempts just to speak about self-determination? Minsk agreements. I want to underline that Ukraine is the only party probably which executes these agreements without not using hard arms on that territory. And I just want to tell you that this is very hard to see those young boys without hands and legs. And when they say we cannot shoot back because we have Minsk agreements and we're staying and looking like they shoot us from Russian grads day by day. And the elections in Donbass, in line with Minsk agreements, will be be held as soon as Russian Federation leaves our territory. The border will be secured, and then they will select any government they would like. And I want to remind the Russian Federation that the United Nations and Council of Europe recognizes that Crimea is Ukrainian part, and all the civilized world will. Of course, you have a veto right in Security Council, and you've blocked the creation of a tribunal on the MH17, which was shot by the representatives of Russian terrorists. But I call on the states to create a tribunal with the General Assembly right, and to find out who is guilty in all those inhuman violations of human rights.
Thank you very much for that reply. We have a last-minute addition to the right of reply from Moldova, and that will be the last on the list. With that, we close the list. Moldova, you have the floor.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I would not go into the details, but I would like to emphasize that for the 30 November 2014 parliamentary elections, the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights deployed an election observation mission. The OSCE ODIHR assessed the compliance of the electoral process with OSCE commitments, other international obligations and standards for democratic elections, and with national legislation. For election day, the OSCE joined efforts with delegations from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, the Parliament Assembly of the Council of Europe, and the European Parliament to form an international election observation mission. According to the statement of preliminary findings and conclusions issued by the IEOM, concluded that the 30 November elections offers voters a wide choice of political alternatives. Contestants enjoyed unimpeded access to the media. The election administration enjoyed the confidence of most stakeholders, and the process was generally well administered, with the exception of the functioning of the new electronic system for the processing of voters on election day. The Moldovan society passes through a deep reform process. The respect for fundamental human rights lying at the core of these changes, and there is a continuously committed to building a fair and inclusive society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With 1 minute over time, thank you all for your participation in this session. Thank you for all of your thoughts and recommendations in terms of how we can improve our processes. I'll remind that although some questions were addressed by a number of different speakers, some questions still remain for us for the future, but I'm sure that there will be adequate opportunity. And I would just like to remind that those recommendations, if circulated, will be compiled. And we very much hope that you've enjoyed the discussion and look forward to your future participation in ODIHR events and also in the Human Dimension Implementation meeting. Thank you very much.